There was a time when Saturday morning meant the sound of a cast iron skillet heating up and the smell of cured pork fat filling every room in the house. Before drive-thrus and frozen waffles took over, black families across the South sat down to breakfasts that could carry you through a 12-hour workday and still leave you thinking about tomorrow's plate. Number 38 on this list fed entire sharecropping families for pennies. And number 23 on this list was so rich, most grandmothers only made it on holidays. These were the dishes that held a household together before the sun was fully up, cooked by women who learned every measurement by hand and never wrote a single recipe down. The recipes came from church kitchens, from cotton country, from Harlem walk-ups, and shotgun houses in New Orleans. So hit subscribe and settle in, because here are 60 African-American breakfasts no one makes anymore. Number 20, crackling bread. This was cornbread with an attitude. A woman in Greenwood, Mississippi would render pork fat back until the solid pieces of fat turned golden and crunchy. Those crispy bits were called cracklings. She stirred them directly into her cornbread batter, poured the batter into a greased skillet, and baked it until the top was golden brown and the cracklings had melted just enough to leave pockets of salt and smoke inside the bread. This bread had a chew to it that regular cornbread did not. It had weight. It had flavor that came from an animal, not a bottle. The practice of using every part of the hog dated back generations, passed down from a time when black families were given only the parts that nobody else wanted. But those parts became the flavor. In the 1950s, you could find crackling bread on breakfast tables from Alabama to East Texas. By the 1990s, most people had stopped rendering their own fat. The cracklings disappeared. The bread went quiet. Number 22, sunrise skillet grits with pan drippings. The Sunrise Kitchen in a 1960s soul food household ran on one rhythm, and grits with pan drippings was its first sound. Water went into the heavy pot before anyone else was awake. Once it rolled, a slow handful of stone, ground white grits got stirred in with a long wooden spoon, and the pot sat at the back of the stove for almost an hour. Right before plating, a tablespoon of bacon drippings from the coffee can on the counter went straight into the bowl. That spoonful turned a plain breakfast into something that tasted like the meat from the night before without costing 1 extra cent. The bowl came to the table with the rim of the spoon already buried, and most people did not look up until the bowl was clean. That spoonful of saved drippings is what we still call the soul of soul food, one quiet ingredient carrying the memory of every meal that came before it. Number 20, fried green tomatoes. Long before Hollywood turned the name into a movie, fried green tomatoes were a workday breakfast. When the garden produced more than a family could eat and frost was coming, mothers picked them green and sliced them thick. Each slice got dredged in cornmeal, then fried in bacon grease until crispy outside and soft inside. The contrast was the whole point. Crunchy coating, almost creamy tomato with a tartness that cut through the richness. A plate of fried green tomatoes with a biscuit and coffee cost nothing because the tomatoes came from the yard the way they used to in every household, and the cornmeal was already in the cupboard. Black families across Alabama and Mississippi made this 3 or 4 times a week during tomato season. Nobody photographed it. Nobody wrote it down. It was August, the tomatoes weren't ripe, and breakfast needed to happen. Toast sounds like nothing, and for a long stretch of history, that was the point. You toasted a slice of bread until it firmed, placed it in a shallow bowl, poured warm milk over it, sweetened with a spoon of sugar or a pinch of salt, depending on the house, and let it soak until the bread softened into something between solid and liquid. It had been called sick room food since the 19th century, given to people recovering from illness, or to young children who needed something easy to get down. But in Black households during the Depression, when the stove was cold and the pantry held milk and stale bread and not much else, milk toast was simply breakfast. Some households added a drop of vanilla or cinnamon stirred into the warm milk before pouring. Those additions were not in any recipe. They came from whoever stood at the stove and whatever she felt that morning deserved. The last time you had it was probably the last time she was there to make it. The grease tin sat on the back of the stove, and everyone knew not to touch it without a reason. Bacon grease was saved after every frying, poured through a strainer into a metal can, kept at room temperature, used for seasoning cast iron, starting gravy, cane syrup. Johnny cakes were a morning staple, combining the simplicity of cornmeal with the sweetness of homemade syrup. Johnny cakes were made from cornmeal, water, and salt, cooked on a hot griddle until golden on both sides. Cane syrup, thick and dark, was poured over the warm cakes, soaking into the crust and pooling on the plate. The syrup was boiled from sugarcane juice, a product many families made themselves or traded with neighbors. During the Depression, cane syrup replaced expensive sweeteners and became a pantry fixture that lasted for weeks. The Johnny cakes were quick to make, requiring only cheap ingredients and minutes over the fire. Children loved the sweetness, while adults valued the speed and economy. Cane syrup Johnny cakes carried comfort and practicality, filling bellies without emptying pockets. Sardines on saltines with yellow mustard, cracked open at the kitchen table before the rest of the world was awake, was the breakfast that required no cooking and no apology. In the 1940s, a tin of sardines in oil cost 8 cents and held enough protein to carry a working person through half a day. Black households across the South and later the urban North kept them in the pantry the way other families kept cereal: stacked, dependable, ready. The method was non-negotiable. Drain the tin by pressing the lid at an angle so the oil ran off, but the fish stayed moist. Lay each sardine flat on a saltine, press a thin line of yellow mustard across the top. No plate if there was no one to wash it for. No fork if fingers were faster. The oil left on your thumb was wiped on a dish rag. It was the breakfast of someone who had fed other people for 40 years and was finally eating on their own schedule. The tin went in the trash. The day began.
Molasses or cane syrup on toast was the simple sweet breakfast that got countless 1960s children out the door with something in their stomachs. Mothers spread the thick, dark syrup across warm toast until it soaked in and dripped at the edges. It was cheap, fast, and full of flavor, a treat that felt bigger than it really was. Kids licked their fingers, wiped their plates, and asked for seconds whenever they could. This breakfast was born from thrift, but it tasted like love and familiarity, not sacrifice. Sometimes mothers warmed the syrup slightly so it softened and flowed into every corner of the bread, turning each bite into something almost candy-like. For children who rarely had store-bought treats, this toast felt like a small miracle on a weekday morning. The smell of the syrup warming on the stove lingered through the house, mixing with the sound of school shoes being tied and doors opening to the cool morning air. It was quick, but never rushed, because everyone stopped for at least a moment to taste that sweetness before the day began. Baked cheese grits casserole prepared the night before allowed grandmothers to focus on Thanksgiving dinner, while breakfast took care of itself. Cooked grits were mixed with eggs, sharp cheddar cheese, butter, and milk, then poured into baking dishes and refrigerated overnight. Thanksgiving morning, the casserole baked until set and golden, filling kitchens with savory aromas. This breakfast could feed large groups with minimal morning effort. The eggs and cheese provided protein, while the grits delivered comforting carbohydrates. Families cut squares and served them hot, sometimes with hot sauce. The casserole represented forward-thinking meal planning. It could be prepared when time allowed, then baked when needed. Children loved the cheesy richness, while adults appreciated the practicality. Baked cheese grits casserole proved planning ahead created stress-free Thanksgiving mornings. Scrapple slices were one of the most resourceful breakfasts older generations relied on, especially in regions where nothing from the pig went to waste. Scrapple mixed pork scraps with cornmeal and spices, forming a loaf that could be sliced and fried until crisp on the outside and soft on the inside. Grandparents cooked it in a hot skillet, letting each piece form that perfect golden crust that crackled slightly under the fork. It was savory, hearty, and deeply rooted in tradition, a dish born from the idea that every ingredient had value. Some families ate it plain, others added syrup or mustard, but no matter how it was served, scrapple had a distinctive flavor that stayed with you. It tasted like farm mornings, like smoke rising from cast iron pans, like a time when food came from skill rather than convenience. Children might turn up their noses at the idea today, but to those who grew up on it, scrapple was a breakfast that meant strength, thrift, and the comfort of knowing a meal would always be there. Even now, the memory of that sizzling sound brings people back to early mornings in small kitchens where tradition guided the skillet. Shrimp and grits brought the coast to the kitchen, turning humble ingredients into a dish worth remembering. Fresh or frozen shrimp were sautéed in butter with onions, garlic, and a little spice, then poured over steaming grits. The creamy base and savory topping came together like a song, smooth, salty, and rich. It was Sunday food, special but simple enough for anyone who knew the value of good seasoning. For families near the water, it was tradition. For those inland, it was aspiration on a plate. The smell of butter and shrimp carried through the house like a promise of joy. This was soul food in its finest form, made from what you had, perfected with love. Shrimp and grits weren't just breakfast. They were belonging, celebration, and pride, all spooned into one perfect bowl. Some families added bacon for extra depth, others threw in peppers or a dash of hot sauce, turning the dish into a reflection of their own roots. No matter how it was made, it always carried a taste of comfort and community. It was the kind of breakfast that made people linger a little longer at the table, talking, laughing, and remembering where they came from. Homemade donuts were a labor of love long before convenience ever came in a box. Families mixed flour, eggs, milk, and a little sugar by hand, rolling the dough on floured tables before cutting perfect rings. The oil had to be just right, hot enough to bubble but not burn, and the kitchen filled with the smell of sweetness meeting heat. Each donut puffed up golden and soft, kissed with crispness at the edges. Once drained, they were rolled in sugar or dipped in glaze, still warm and tender. Children waited eagerly, dusting their fingers in sugar while stealing the first taste. These weren't store-bought treats. They were handmade rewards, crafted slowly on quiet mornings. A batch of donuts meant love, celebration, or simply the joy of having enough ingredients to spare. They were simple yet sacred, proof that happiness could be fried and shared. Some cooks made holes into tiny donut balls, frying them as munchkins before the name ever existed. Others flavored the dough with nutmeg or a splash of buttermilk for tang. The smell of homemade donuts lingered like a song through the house, reminding everyone that effort and sweetness often went hand in hand. Turtle soup breakfast bowls were a dish born of necessity, reflecting the creativity of African American cooks during lean times. When turtles were available from local rivers or swamps, they were cleaned, simmered, and stewed into a thick soup. Vegetables and spices were added when possible, stretching the meat into a filling broth. The soup was often eaten in the morning, served hot in bowls that provided both comfort and strength. Turtle meat was valued for its richness, and the dish became a way to turn scarce resources into a sustaining meal. Though unusual by modern standards, it was once respected as a practical and nourishing option. Families relied on it when other proteins were out of reach, making it a reminder of both hardship and resilience. Turtle soup breakfast bowls showed how communities survived by making use of every resource available. field pea and rice hash turned a simple pot of peas into a hearty breakfast that fueled long days with ease. Black-eyed peas were simmered with onions, garlic, and a little smoked meat until tender, then spooned generously over steaming white rice. The flavors melded into a comforting bowl of earthy beans and fluffy grains that filled stomachs and lifted spirits. In the 1970s, this dish connected generations, recalling the Hoppin' John traditions of New Year's Day, while serving as an everyday morning staple in many African American homes. Some families stirred in hot peppers for a gentle heat, while others finished with a drizzle of pepper vinegar for brightness. Field pea and rice hash proved that a few inexpensive ingredients could yield both nourishment and rich flavor, keeping families strong and satisfied. It celebrated agricultural roots and the creativity of cooks who understood that true comfort comes from a well-seasoned pot and the love shared around the breakfast table. Fried green tomato. Po' boys turned unripe tomatoes into a sandwich that tasted like pure coastal sunshine wrapped in crunchy cornmeal. Thick slices of firm green tomatoes were dredged in seasoned cornmeal and fried until their edges crisped and their centers softened just enough to release a bright tang. Piled high on soft French bread with a smear of remoulade and a handful of shredded lettuce, they became a favorite along Gulf Coast streets where shrimp boats docked and music floated from open windows. Vendors often sold them at fish fries and fairs when seafood prices climbed too high, proving that a garden vegetable could carry the day as well as any oyster or crab. Families remembered the scent of hot oil and the pop of cornmeal batter while waiting in line for a sandwich that blended thrift and celebration. Today, fast food counters try to imitate the flavor, but they cannot capture the quiet magic of fresh garden tomatoes picked before ripening, fried in backyard kitchens, and shared among neighbors who knew the value of every bite. Smoked herring and rice was the ocean's gift to the southern kitchen. The herring came salted and cured, strong enough to scent the air even before cooking. Grandparents soaked it first, softening its bite, then fried it in a pan until the edges curled and crisped. The fish went over hot rice, its smoky oil dripping down like seasoning. The meal was bold, salty, rich, and unforgettable. For those who lived near the coast, it was a taste of home and history, connecting generations through flavor. The smell might have been sharp, but it spoke of sustenance and pride. Smoked herring and rice was food that filled the stomach and lingered on the soul. It reminded everyone that humble ingredients could build mighty traditions. Every plate told the same story of struggle, resourcefulness, and the sea's generosity, carried into the kitchen with faith and fire. The salt of the fish met the warmth of the rice in perfect rhythm, a balance of sea and soil. Sometimes a splash of hot sauce or a side of cornbread completed the plate, making something humble feel whole. Even long after breakfast was done, the scent stayed, a memory of mornings when families found strength in what they had and gratitude in what they shared.
Number 16, pork brains and scrambled eggs. This one made you look twice. A woman in Tupelo, Mississippi, would open a can of pork brains in milk gravy, rinse them, chop them, and scramble them into eggs with salt and pepper. The texture was soft, almost creamy, and the taste was mild enough that children ate it without knowing what it was. In the 1950s, canned pork brains were a common item on grocery store shelves across the South. They cost almost nothing. A single can could stretch a few eggs into a meal for 4 people. This was arithmetic. This was survival. By the 1970s, cholesterol warnings started pushing organ meats off the American plate. By the 1990s, most grocery stores had stopped stocking canned brains altogether. But in the decades before that, this was a breakfast that kept families full until supper with ingredients that cost less than a quarter. Your grandmother did not waste a single part of the animal. That was not a choice. That was a principle. Number 19, smothered onions on toast. When there was no meat at all, a skillet of slow smothered onions over day-old bread was breakfast. 2 large yellow onions went into the pan with a spoon of saved drippings, and the heat stayed low for almost 20 minutes. The onions cooked down to a soft brown jam that smelled like supper instead of sacrifice. 2 slices of bread, toasted dry in the oven, got covered with the warm onions and eaten with a fork. It was the kind of breakfast nobody bragged about, but it kept the body going on a morning when the icebox was almost empty. Number 19, blackstrap molasses milk. A tall glass of cold milk with 2 tablespoons of blackstrap molasses stirred until it turned dark and sweet. Mothers called it a tonic. Grandmothers said it built strong blood. They were not wrong. Blackstrap molasses contains more iron per tablespoon than a serving of spinach, and in communities where anemia was common and doctor visits rare, a glass every morning was folk medicine that worked. A jar of grandma's molasses cost 35 cents in 1965. Combined with milk at 49 cents a half gallon, 2 weeks of morning drinks for under $1. Children drank it cold in summer, warm in winter. Some mothers added a raw egg and shook it like a milkshake. The taste was dark and mineral, almost like coffee for a child. No one calls it a superfood. No one puts it on a menu. But the iron it delivered kept black children standing in classrooms where they were not always welcome. Cornmeal porridge with blackstrap molasses told you, without sentimentality, exactly where you stood and what you were going to do about it. You cooked the cornmeal slow in water or thin milk until it thickened, then drizzled blackstrap molasses over the top in a slow spiral that sank in before you stirred it through. Blackstrap molasses was a staple of African American pantries for generations. The dark, bitter, mineral-rich byproduct of refining sugar cane, costing far less than refined sugar and delivering considerably more nutrition: iron, calcium, magnesium, and potassium. The minerals that kept working bodies going when meat was scarce and vegetables were seasonal. Enslaved people and their descendants depended on molasses as a primary sweetener from the 17th century onward, long before it became a Depression-era substitute. For those stretched thin through the lean years, this was the morning that made the rest possible. It cost pennies. It was warm, filling, and bittersweet in a way plain porridge never managed. She watched you finish every spoonful before you were allowed to leave. Milk dandelion green scramble was a breakfast that came from the yard when the pantry had nothing left. Dandelion greens, dismissed as weeds by those who could afford better, were gathered fresh and sautéed with onions and lard. Eggs were cracked over the wilted greens and scrambled together, creating a plate that was both bitter and rich. The greens provided vitamins badly needed after long winters of preserved food, and the eggs added protein to carry bodies through hard mornings. For families with no money for store-bought vegetables, foraging was not a choice but a necessity. Children might not have loved the bitterness, but they grew up with it as part of their routine. Elders passed down knowledge of which wild plants were safe and how to prepare them. Dandelion green scramble was resilience pulled directly from the soil. Crackers and cane syrup was the breakfast that required nothing but a tin of Georgia cane syrup and whatever saltines were left in the house, and somehow it held you until noon. Back when a can of Steen's pure cane syrup cost less than a quarter and lasted a household most of the winter, black grandmothers across Louisiana and the Deep South kept it on the table like a condiment, not just for biscuits, not just for cornbread, but for crackers when there was nothing else and time was short. You stacked them flat, drizzled the syrup in slow circles, and waited. The trick was the wait. 30 seconds too long, and they went limp. 30 seconds too short, and you were eating dry crackers with sticky fingers. Elders knew exactly when. By feel, by the way, the syrup stopped moving. Nobody wrote that down. You learned it standing next to her. Now she's gone, and the tin is still on the shelf, and it just doesn't taste the same when you do it yourself.
Smothered breakfast potatoes were the Skillet hero of 1960s mornings, a dish that stretched a handful of ingredients into something big enough to feed everyone. Mothers sliced the potatoes thin, letting them hit the hot grease before adding onions, peppers, salt, and a little black pepper for heat. The skillet hissed, the house filled with the scent of frying potatoes, and sleepy children wandered into the kitchen even before they were called. The potatoes softened and browned, edges crisping, onions turning sweet, and the peppers melting into the mix. This was a breakfast you could eat alone or beside eggs, biscuits, or sausage, and it never disappointed. Mothers loved it because it was dependable and cheap. Children loved it because it tasted like comfort, disguised as something simple. A plate of smothered potatoes could fuel a child until lunch, carrying them through long mornings at school or long walks down dusty roads. Over the years, frozen hash browns and faster options took its place, but nothing compares to the taste of potatoes cooked slow in a cast-iron skillet by a mother who knew exactly when to turn them. For those who remember, one spoonful brings back the sound of sizzling grease and the warmth of a kitchen where breakfast meant love made visible. Fried potato cakes made from leftover mashed potatoes became Thanksgiving morning crispy treats that children begged for. Grandmothers mixed cold mashed potatoes with beaten eggs, chopped onions, and flour, forming patties that fried until golden brown and crusty. The outside turned crispy while the inside stayed soft and fluffy. These cakes used potatoes left from testing recipes or from earlier preparations. Served with butter or gravy, they provided filling breakfast that cost virtually nothing. In Black households where waste was never acceptable, fried potato cakes represented culinary intelligence. Children ate them hot off the skillet, burning their fingers but too eager to wait. Adults enjoyed them with coffee, appreciating how yesterday's side dish became today's featured breakfast. The cakes could be made quickly, freeing grandmothers to focus on dinner. Fried potato cakes proved resourcefulness could transform leftovers. Stewed apples over grits was the quiet morning comfort many families turned to when fresh fruit was limited, but preserved apples were always within reach. Grandparents would slice apples thin and let them simmer with sugar or syrup until they softened into a fragrant golden mixture that tasted like fall in every season. Meanwhile, a pot of grits bubbled on the stove, thickening slowly as it absorbed the heat. When the stewed apples were spooned over the top, the contrast of creamy grits and sweet fruit felt like a small luxury. It was warm, filling, and gentle, the kind of breakfast that soothed the stomach and the spirit. Some families added cinnamon, others added butter, but most kept it simple because the apples were already sweet enough. This dish was a reminder of home orchards, backyard trees, and jars of preserves lined up on pantry shelves. It tasted like patience and tradition, like the kind of mornings where time moved slower. Even today, stewed apples over grits feels like a forgotten treasure from a quieter time. Homemade cane syrup butter was the southern spread of dreams, simple, golden, and almost too good to be real. Mothers whipped soft butter with thick, dark cane syrup until it turned glossy and light, blending smoky sweetness with creamy richness. It spread like silk across biscuits, pancakes, and cornbread, melting the moment it touched something warm. Each jar felt like a treasure, the kind of treat you made when there wasn't much to go around but love enough to make it sweet. The syrup carried hints of molasses and caramel, its depth of flavor born from slow boiling and patience. Families didn't need much. A spoonful turned an ordinary breakfast into something worth lingering over. Making it was an act of care, the rhythm of stirring as familiar as a hymn. Cane syrup butter sat on the table in mason jars, catching the light like honey, reminding everyone that joy could come from what you already had. It wasn't a luxury from a store. It was homemade elegance, a blend of memory, pride, and sweetness, spread thin but felt deeply. Poached eggs on toast were breakfast elegance in a world that rarely had time for it. Water simmered just below boiling, and eggs were lowered gently, their whites curling around the yolks like soft silk. When lifted out and set on buttered toast, they gleamed, tender, trembling, and perfect. A sprinkle of salt and pepper was all it needed. It was a dish that made even a modest kitchen feel refined. The first cut of the knife released a golden stream that soaked into the bread, rich and warm. This breakfast carried a sense of calm, the quiet kind that came before a day's labor. Grandparents who made poached eggs treated it like a ritual, never rushed, always patient. It was proof that even in lean times, beauty could live on the breakfast plate. Poached eggs on toast weren't about luxury. They were about intention, about giving the morning the dignity it deserved. Field pea cakes were one of those breakfast recipes that reflected both creativity and frugality. Leftover field peas would be mashed and mixed with cornmeal, onion, and a touch of seasoning, then shaped into patties and fried until crisp. They were simple to prepare and stretched whatever little was left from dinner into the morning meal. For farming families, peas were easy to grow and store, making them a dependable staple. The patties were hearty enough to satisfy hunger and could be eaten plain or alongside bread, syrup, or even a bit of bacon when available. The texture was soft inside with a crunchy crust that made them appealing to both children and adults. Field pea cakes spoke to the ingenuity of cooks who made sure nothing went to waste. They were not just thrifty, but also delicious, proving that even the simplest ingredients could be turned into a breakfast worth remembering. Stewed prunes and citrus offered a naturally sweet and nourishing side that fit perfectly with the back-to-nature movement of the 1970s. Dried prunes were simmered gently in water with slices of orange or lemon until they softened into a rich compote. A touch of cinnamon or clove added warmth, and the citrus brightened the deep, earthy flavor of the fruit. This dish required little sugar because the natural sweetness of the prunes intensified as they cooked, creating a syrupy juice that tasted indulgent yet wholesome. Served warm over oatmeal, alongside biscuits, or even chilled with yogurt, it provided fiber and essential vitamins that families valued. African American households embraced it for both its practicality and comfort, turning an inexpensive ingredient into something special. Stewed prunes and citrus stood as a testament to mindful cooking, where a simple pot of fruit could deliver nutrition and quiet pleasure, reminding everyone that breakfast could be as healthful as it was delicious without any extravagant ingredients or effort. Red drink, Juneteenth punch, flowed like a symbol of freedom and memory at community celebrations marking emancipation. Made from hibiscus petals or bright strawberries steeped into a deep crimson infusion, the drink stood for resilience and the blood of those who fought for liberation. Families would gather in churchyards and town squares, pouring the sweet, tangy liquid into simple cups while music and laughter filled the warm June air. Children chased each other between picnic tables as elders told the story of the first Juneteenth, reminding everyone of the hard-won joy behind the holiday. The punch often carried a gentle spice from cloves or ginger, offering a flavor both refreshing and layered, much like the history it honored. Preparing the drink was as important as drinking it, with women and men alike contributing fruit, sugar, and labor to the cause. Though some communities still keep the tradition alive, many younger generations have never tasted the vibrant red drink that once defined a day of remembrance and celebration. Fried corn and onions with grits was a skillet breakfast that felt like sunshine in a bowl. Corn kernels popped and sizzled in bacon grease, mixing with chopped onions that browned slow and sweet. The scent filled the air, earthy and inviting. When spooned over hot grits, the mixture created a perfect balance: sweet, salty, creamy, and crisp. Grandparents called it country gold, a dish that could feed many with little. It was hearty, colorful, and full of life. Each spoonful brought together the garden and the stove, the land and the table. Fried corn and onions with grits wasn't just breakfast, it was heritage served hot. It told the story of people who turned simplicity into art, one skillet at a time. Some mornings, a sprinkle of pepper or a spoonful of milk joined the pot, turning the humble bowl into something close to sacred. It was a reminder that even in scarcity, flavor, love, and hope never ran out.
Number 24, sweet potato and leftover pork. In Tuskegee, Alabama, in the 1950s, a study by the Department of Agriculture found that fat salt pork, cornmeal, and molasses were the staple foods in most black households. So when there was a piece of pork left from supper, it did not get thrown away. A woman in rural Alabama would slice a cold sweet potato from the night before, fry it in the leftover pork grease alongside whatever scrap of meat remained, and serve it with a biscuit. That was breakfast. Sweet potatoes were everywhere in the South. They grew in the small plots that black families kept behind their houses, the same way their ancestors had grown them for generations. The potato was free, the pork was already cooked, the grease was already in the pan. This was not leftovers, this was planning. And it was the kind of breakfast that disappeared when refrigerators got bigger and people started throwing food away. That used to be unthinkable. Number 24, 1 slab of fatback, 7 mornings. A single piece of fatback could feed a whole household for a week, and grandmothers in Mississippi and Alabama knew exactly how to make it last. They would buy 1 thick slab on Saturday for around 20 cents a pound, then score it across the top with a paring knife so the salt would render down slow. Monday morning, 2 slices went into the cold skillet. Those slices crisped up and gave back nearly a cup of clear, golden grease that flavored everything else that hit the pan that week. The skillet never got washed. The leftover grease became the cooking fat for Tuesday's eggs, Wednesday's grits, Thursday's potatoes, and Friday's hoe cakes. By Sunday, the original slab was almost gone, but the flavor had touched every plate that came through the kitchen. 1 pig and a careful hand could carry a family from one paycheck to the next, and almost no one threw away the brown bits stuck to the bottom of the pan. Number 24, coffee-soaked bread. A cup of black coffee and a heel of day-old bread. You tore the bread into pieces, dropped them into the coffee, added a spoonful of sugar, and ate it with a spoon-like soup. In the Mississippi Delta, this was called SOP. In parts of Alabama, they called it coffee, bread. The coffee softened the bread into something porridge-like, warm and caffeinated enough to get a person moving back then. A pound of coffee cost 75 cents in 1964. A loaf of bread was 21 cents. Together, a week of breakfast for under $1. Nobody was proud of this recipe, but thousands of elderly black men and women ate this alone in quiet kitchens across the South, and they never told their children because admitting you ate bread soaked in coffee felt like admitting something larger about your life. Peanut butter spread on a scratch biscuit was a breakfast with 2 layers of history in it. The biscuit, flour, lard, buttermilk, salt, just enough baking powder to raise it, had been on African American morning tables since before the Civil War, shaped by hands that knew the dough by feel, not measurement. The peanut butter carried older roots, tracing back to West African groundnut traditions that arrived in the memories of enslaved people long before the commercial jar existed. By the Depression years, the Bureau of Home Economics was promoting peanut butter as a protein substitute for meat-struggling families could no longer afford, and in black households that had been stretching protein for generations, it needed no advertisement. A jar cost a few cents and lasted the week. 2 biscuits spread thick held a person through the morning without complaint. The biscuits were made in a batch on Sunday and eaten through Wednesday. Nobody from those kitchens ever needed to be told what to do with the stale biscuit. Hog's head hash was a breakfast rooted in the no-waste tradition of black cooking during the Depression. When a hog was butchered, the head provided meat that was stewed, chopped, and seasoned before being fried with potatoes and onions. The mixture browned until crispy at the edges, filling the kitchen with a savory smell that lingered after the meal was done. The flavor was intense, smoky, and satisfying, stretching a part of the animal that others discarded into food for the whole family. For children, It was hearty enough to last through school. For adults, it honored the animal by using every part with care. Hog's head hash was not delicate, but it was respected for what it represented: resourcefulness and the ability to create abundance from what others threw away. A fried egg on white bread with hot sauce proved a black grandmother living alone had everything she needed, because she knew exactly what to do with 2 ingredients and a hot skillet in under 5 minutes. She cracked the egg into a thin slick of bacon grease, covered it with a saucer, never a lid, always a saucer, and let the steam finish the white without flipping. The yolk stayed intact and runny. When she slid it onto plain white bread and hit it with 3 shakes of Louisiana hot sauce, she had a complete protein breakfast that held her past noon. The saucer was the secret. Most people flipped the egg and killed the yolk, or left it uncovered and the white stayed wet on top. The steam method took 2 minutes flat and was never written down in any kitchen, anywhere. It was passed through watching, not words. Crystal and Louisiana brands were the trusted names. Now she's gone, and someone else lives in that kitchen, and they use a lid.
Scrambled eggs with onions and peppers were the way mothers stretched breakfast to feed large families without spending much. A few eggs went further when mixed with vegetables, and the colors alone made children feel like they were getting something special. The onions softened, the peppers brightened, and the whole pan filled with steam as the eggs cooked through. These eggs tasted warm, savory, and slightly sweet from the vegetables melting together. Kids loved them spooned over grits or next to biscuits, and mothers loved that the dish fed everyone without waste. It was a breakfast born from necessity but remembered for comfort. On busy mornings, mothers could whip it together in minutes, still managing to fill every plate before anyone ran out the door. Children watched the skillet bubble, listened to the quiet sizzle, and waited for the moment a big spoonful hit their plates. And even though it was simple, it somehow felt complete, like the kind of food that held the morning steady before the day had a chance to pull it apart. Sweet potato coffee cake with cinnamon drizzle was the Thanksgiving morning centerpiece that brought families together before the turkey touched the oven. Grandmothers mashed leftover sweet potatoes into thick batter seasoned with nutmeg, cinnamon, and cloves, then baked it in cast-iron pans that created golden, crispy bottoms. The drizzle came from powdered sugar mixed with milk and vanilla, poured over while warm so it soaked into every crevice. This wasn't fancy bakery cake, but something born from thrift, using plentiful fall sweet potatoes. Families gathered around kitchen tables, cutting thick slices while coffee percolated. Children fought over corner pieces where the drizzle pooled. The cake stayed moist through the weekend. It represented more than food. It showed how grandmothers stretched resources while making mornings special. Today's brunches serve croissants, but they can't touch the memory of sweet potato coffee cake warming cold November mornings. Egg and rice bowls were one of those fast, dependable breakfasts grandparents made without thinking, because the ingredients were always there and the result was always good. A pot of rice from last night could be rewarmed with a pat of butter, turning it soft and fragrant again. Then came the egg, fried or scrambled, laid gently over the top like a finishing touch. Only older hands knew how to time perfectly. The yolk soaked into the rice or the scrambled bits mixed through, creating a bowl that tasted warm, mild, and deeply comforting. It was cheap, quick, and endlessly reliable, the kind of breakfast that made mornings feel steady. Families loved it because nothing went to waste, because rice could stretch farther than any box of cereal ever could. Egg and rice bowls tasted like routine, like care, like the kind of quiet morning love that came before the sun was fully up. Homemade butter rolls were what happened when breakfast met dessert. Soft yeast dough was rolled up and baked in a pan of creamy, buttery custard until puffed and golden. As they baked, the sauce thickened around the rolls, forming sweet, sticky edges that begged to be scraped with a spoon. The smell was pure heaven: vanilla, butter, and warmth. Mothers made them on Sundays or special occasions, serving them hot from the oven when the whole family gathered. They were tender, rich, and full of love. Butter rolls were more than bread. They were joy you could eat, made with patience and pride. Every pan was a masterpiece of resourcefulness, made from the simplest ingredients: flour, sugar, milk, and faith. When they came out bubbling and brown, the whole house fell silent for a moment just to breathe in the scent. They were often shared with neighbors or saved for the preacher, a sweet gesture of community and care. Peach preserves on hot biscuits was sunshine captured in a jar. Ripe peaches cooked down with sugar until golden and thick, the scent filling the kitchen like summer itself. Spread onto a steaming biscuit straight from the oven, the preserves melted into the crumb, seeping sweetness into every bite. It was sticky, messy, and utterly perfect. Grandmothers kept shelves lined with jars, each one a memory of fruit picked by hand and simmered slow. Those preserves were more than food. They were love saved for later, waiting for a cold morning to brighten. A biscuit topped with peach preserves was more than breakfast. It was a reminder that summer could be tasted even in the heart of winter. Families gathered around the table as the golden syrup dripped from fingers and laughter filled the air. Some added a pat of butter before spreading the preserves, letting the heat make everything glossy and rich. Every jar represented care, the patience to peel, stir, and seal by hand. The first taste always brought back long afternoons of harvest, of baskets heavy with peaches and sunlight. Peach preserves on biscuits were a bridge between seasons, a bite of warmth that carried through the year. Black-eyed pea salad carried luck into the new year before the clock even struck midnight. Served cold, it was tangy and refreshing, a rare contrast to the heavy holiday spread. The peas were cooked tender, then mixed with diced peppers, onions, and vinegar dressing that danced on the tongue. For many, it was more than a side dish. It was a ritual of hope. In African American homes, black-eyed peas symbolized prosperity and renewal, a tradition passed down from ancestors who made meaning from what they had. Preparing them for Christmas meant faith in what was coming. The salad was easy to make but full of flavor, something that improved with time as it sat in the fridge overnight. The tang of vinegar and sweetness of onion created a perfect harmony of balance and belief. It was light yet powerful, simple yet layered with heritage. At church dinners and family gatherings, you'd always see a bowl of it, glistening, colorful, and made from the heart. It was the quietest dish on the table, but the one with the loudest blessing. Country sausage and red pepper gravy turned ordinary biscuits into a feast, combining smoky pork with the sweetness of peppers and onions. Sausage browned slowly in a heavy skillet, releasing drippings that formed the base of a creamy gravy thickened with flour and milk. Strips of red bell pepper and chopped onions simmered in the mixture, lending a vibrant color and a subtle sweetness that balanced the savory richness. Poured over split biscuits or spooned onto grits, the gravy soaked into every layer, ensuring each bite was flavorful and filling. In African American kitchens of the 1970s, this dish represented comfort and abundance, a way to stretch a small amount of meat into a meal for the entire family. Some cooks added a touch of crushed red pepper for gentle heat, while others served sliced tomatoes alongside for freshness. Country sausage and red pepper gravy brought together bold taste and home-style satisfaction, making mornings feel special even on the busiest days. Chitterlings and eggs were for Sunday mornings when the whole house smelled like patience and pride. The chitterlings were cleaned carefully, washed again and again, then seasoned deep with salt, pepper, and onions before hitting the skillet. They fried slowly, releasing a scent that told everyone it was a day worth slowing down for. The eggs came next, scrambled in the same pan so they could soak up every drop of flavor left behind. Together they made a breakfast rich enough to feel like a celebration, not just a meal. It was a dish born from necessity, but carried with joy, a way to turn what others overlooked into something worth gathering for. The taste was bold, earthy, and unforgettable, layered with memory and meaning. Coffee brewed in the corner, laughter circled the table, and music sometimes played from a radio humming low. Chitterlings and eggs were not for every morning. They were for the ones that mattered most. They tasted of care, community, and the comfort of surviving one more week together. Each plate told a story that stretched back generations of families who knew how to make beauty from struggle and celebration from scraps. Goosefoot seed meal offered vital nourishment when cultivated grains were scarce or too costly. Goosefoot, also known as lamb's quarters, grew abundantly along field edges and yielded tiny seeds rich in protein and minerals. Enslaved harvesters shook the plants over cloths to collect the seeds, then winnowed and ground them into a fine flour. This flour could be cooked into hot cereal, mixed with cornmeal for bread, or used to thicken stews, providing a surprisingly hearty alternative to purchased grain. The practice drew on both African and indigenous traditions of using wild seeds as staple foods. Even after emancipation, rural families in parts of the Midwest and Appalachia continued to gather goosefoot seeds for their high nutritional value. Modern interest in quinoa, which is a close relative, echoes this old wisdom. Goosefoot seed meal stands as a reminder that careful attention to the landscape and patient handwork could turn what many considered weeds into a dependable source of strength and nourishment that kept families fed through the hardest seasons.
Number 17, rice and gravy. In parts of Louisiana, South Carolina, and coastal Georgia, rice was not a side dish. It was the center of the plate. A woman in Beaufort, South Carolina, would cook a pot of white rice in the morning, ladle leftover gravy from the night before over the top, and call it breakfast. That was it. Rice and gravy, no egg, no meat, just starch and salt and whatever flavor the gravy carried from supper. The connection between black families and rice runs deep. Enslaved Africans from the rice-growing regions of West Africa were specifically brought to South Carolina because they knew how to cultivate the crop. That knowledge built the entire low country economy, and generations later, their descendants were still eating rice every single morning. The gravy might be beef drippings, it might be onion gravy, it might be nothing more than flour and water browned in a skillet. The rice held it all. That was the whole point. Number 23, hot water cornbread for breakfast. When the flour ran out before payday, a quick patty of hot water cornbread filled the gap, and almost every soul food kitchen leaned on this trick. The method had only 3 things in it: cornmeal, a little salt, and boiling water poured straight from the kettle. The mix went stiff in the bowl, then a wet hand patted it into rounds the size of a saucer, and those rounds dropped into a 1/4 inch of hot lard. 3 minutes aside and breakfast was on the table. Working women in Detroit and Cleveland kept a coffee can of cornmeal next to the stove for exactly this reason. It cost almost nothing, it filled up a grown man, and it took less than 10 minutes from start to finish. The patties were often eaten torn open with a spoonful of pot liquor saved from the night before. Number 18, sugar bread. A slice of white bread, a smear of butter or margarine, a heavy sprinkle of sugar. That was it. A mother folded the bread in half so the sugar would not fall out and handed it to a child on the way out the door. A loaf cost 21 cents. Sugar cost a dime. Margarine was 25 cents a pound, less than a dime per serving. This was not nutrition. This was a promise. A mother saying, "I could not give you eggs this morning, but I can give you something sweet enough to make you forget that." In black neighborhoods of Memphis, Detroit, and Chicago, sugar bread was the breakfast of the Great Migration. Families who had moved north for factory jobs still ate it on payday mornings, long after they could afford something better, because some foods passed down through hard times carry more than calories. They carry the memory of when you could not afford anything else. Here is something that does not get said enough. The women who made these breakfasts were not cooking. They were engineering. They had a budget that was fixed, miles that were not, and a clock that gave them 20 minutes between waking up and getting a child out the door. Every ingredient had to justify its place. Every penny had to stretch. Every plate had to look full enough that a child did not go to school feeling poor. These were not recipes born from creativity. They were born from mathematics in kitchens that were too hot in summer and too cold in winter by women who had already been awake for an hour doing someone else's laundry. The breakfasts on this list are not nostalgia. They are evidence that Black women in the 1960s fed families on budgets that should not have been survivable. Egg went in last, and you had to know when. If the grits had stopped bubbling but were still steaming, that was the moment. You pressed it well into the center with the back of a spoon, cracked the egg directly in, covered the pot, and let the heat finish it. This was not a recipe from a card. It was knowledge held in hands that had been stretching a meal for generations, producing a full breakfast from 2 ingredients that cost less than a dime in the 1950s. Grits are among the oldest foods in African American kitchens, ground from hominy corn using Native American nixtamalization, a process that unlocks nutrients plain grinding cannot release, and carried through Southern cooking from plantation quarters to city apartments. 1 pot, 1 flame, 1 dish to wash. For a woman living alone after her children had gone north, that economy mattered. The yolk broke when you pressed it and spread through the grits like a slow yellow sauce. Nobody makes it that way anymore. Boiled peanuts and cornbread was a pairing that showed how Black families turned garden crops into dependable morning meals. Raw peanuts were boiled in salted water until soft and briny, their shells giving way to warm, tender centers packed with protein. Cornbread was baked fresh or saved from the night before, crumbled and eaten alongside for a combination that was salty, filling, and cheap. Peanuts grew easily in southern soil, making them accessible to families farming small plots. Cornmeal cost almost nothing and stretched across days. Together, the two required no expensive ingredients and no complicated preparation. Children grew up eating the pairing without question, while adults relied on its staying power before heading to fields. Boiled peanuts and cornbread was humble food that carried tradition and survival in every bite. A sliced tomato with salt and black pepper on white bread sounds too simple to be a meal until you've eaten one in August. Ripe, heavy with juice, pressed between 2 pieces of bread with nothing but coarse salt and a real grind of pepper. And understood that simple is not the same as small. In Black households across the rural South, garden tomatoes were the summer pantry. They cost nothing to grow, ripened faster than you could eat them alone, and for an elder living by herself, 1 large tomato was a full breakfast plate. The bread soaked up the juice from the bottom. You ate it over the sink, and the juice still ran down your arm. She knew to salt it first, let it sit 30 seconds to pull the moisture, then press it to the bread. That sequence, salt, wait, press, was the difference between a meal and a wet mess. If you salted it and ate it immediately, you lost. You had to know the wait. She's gone now. The garden is still there.
Cream of wheat with butter and brown sugar was the smooth, warm breakfast that felt like a blanket you could eat, especially on cold mornings when the wind tapped against the windows and children had to be coaxed out of bed. Mothers stirred it constantly so it stayed silky, never lumpy, adding butter until it glistened and a spoonful of brown sugar that melted into swirls of caramel sweetness. It was gentler than grits, softer, the kind of food a child could eat half asleep. Before school, cream of wheat sat steaming on the table beside toast or fruit, offering comfort that stuck with you all the way to the bus stop. It filled stomachs quickly and cheaply, which mattered in homes where every dollar had to stretch across a week. Kids sometimes sprinkled cinnamon, others added extra butter, turning the bowl into something they could claim as their own. The quiet joy of it lived in the routine. in the way the smell drifted through hallways before the sun even rose. But as instant packets and faster breakfasts took over, this slow-stirred version faded away. Still, for those who grew up in the 1960s, the memory remains bright. A warm bowl, a warm kitchen, and a mother standing at the stove making sure the morning started with something steady and good. Pan-fried liver mush with mustard on toast was Thanksgiving morning protein using preserved organ meat to create hearty breakfast. Liver mush, that Appalachian creation combining pork liver with cornmeal and spices, was sliced and fried until the exterior crisped while the interior stayed creamy. Served on toasted bread with sharp mustard, it provided sustaining nutrition. This breakfast appeared in Black households influenced by Appalachian foodways, where cultures overlapped. The liver mush was economical because organ meats were cheaper than muscle meat but packed with nutrients. Grandmothers fried it quickly, creating breakfast that lasted through morning preparations. Children acquired the taste gradually. Adults valued how the small serving provided significant protein and energy. Pan-fried liver mush with mustard represented the blending of regional traditions and practical wisdom of using every part of available animals. Rice and raisins with butter was the kind of breakfast that felt like a treat, even though it came from the most basic pantry ingredients a household always had on hand. Long before sugary cereal brands took over the shelves, many families started their day with a warm bowl of rice simmered until soft and mixed with sweet raisins that plumped in the heat. A pat of butter melted over the top, coating each grain and adding richness that made the dish feel far more indulgent than its low cost suggested. It was warm, steady, and comforting, the kind of breakfast that felt like a hug before school or chores. Grandparents made it because rice was cheap, raisins lasted forever in a jar, and butter brought everything together in a way that tasted wholesome and familiar. Some added a sprinkle of sugar, others a dash of cinnamon, but most kept it simple, letting the steam rise like a quiet morning ritual. The flavor was gentle, the sweetness mild, and the bowl always seemed to disappear faster than expected. For many families, this dish was tied to winter mornings, cold floors, and the feeling of being cared for before the day even started. Even today, people who grew up with rice and raisins remember the way it filled the house with warmth and made them feel ready for anything. Hot rice cakes with sorghum syrup were thrift turned golden, the kind of breakfast that made virtue taste sweet. Leftover rice, too precious to throw away, was mixed with egg, a spoonful of flour, and a splash of milk until it became a thick, humble batter. Dropped onto a greased griddle, the cakes sizzled as they fried, crisping at the edges and puffing slightly in the center. When flipped, they browned to perfection, soft inside yet proud of their crunch. A drizzle of sorghum syrup, dark, earthy, and sweet as molasses, transformed them into something nearly elegant. The syrup clung to the ridges, pooling at the edges of the plate like liquid amber. For working families, it was proof that yesterday's rice could bring today's joy. It was cheap, filling, and full of heart, the kind of meal that made you thankful for leftovers. The aroma of frying rice cakes mixed with syrup filled the kitchen, wrapping it in warmth and memory. These cakes were a quiet nod to resourcefulness, the art of turning almost nothing into something beautiful. Coffee and sugar cookies might sound like dessert, but to grandparents, it was breakfast worth rising early for. The coffee was strong and dark, the kind brewed in enamel pots that never left the stove. The cookies were soft or crisp, depending on the household, often flavored with a hint of vanilla or nutmeg. Dipped into the steaming cup, they softened just enough to melt in your mouth. It was a quiet morning ritual, not rushed, not fancy, but full of grace. Adults called it a quick bite. Children called it heaven. There was something timeless about it, the sweetness balancing the bitterness, the warmth balancing the chill of dawn. For many, this pairing was not indulgence, it was peace. Coffee and sugar cookies were the kind of breakfast that taught you to slow down, to savor, and to start the day grateful. Boiled peanuts and cornbread may not sound like a traditional breakfast, but in rural kitchens it was a regular pairing. Peanuts were boiled until soft and seasoned with salt, their briny flavor creating a hearty snack that doubled as a meal. Cornbread was baked fresh or left over from the night before, crumbled and eaten alongside the peanuts. The combination was salty, filling, and inexpensive, making it ideal for large families and farm workers. Boiled peanuts provided protein, while cornbread gave comfort and substance, ensuring that no one went hungry before heading out to work. This pairing reflected the way African American kitchens used what was abundant and turned it into something reliable. Children grew up eating it without question, while adults valued it for its practicality and taste. Though not common on today's breakfast tables, boiled peanuts and cornbread once stood as a symbol of resilience, thrift, and the creativity of turning humble foods into sustaining meals. Red-eye ham and coffee gravy provided a bold, bracing start to the morning with a flavor that lingered long after breakfast was done. Thick slices of country-cured ham were seared in a heavy skillet until their edges browned and their fat rendered into a savory base. Into that sizzling pan went black coffee, which deglazed the salty bits and created a thin, smoky gravy. The sharp bitterness of coffee balanced the ham's rich saltiness, producing a sauce both surprising and addictive. Poured over warm biscuits or spooned onto grits, the gravy soaked in and carried a gentle caffeine kick that woke up the senses. Families across the South prized this dish for its simplicity and strength, a reminder of farm mornings when nothing went to waste. Red-eye ham and coffee gravy reflected the ingenuity of African American cooks who transformed pantry basics into something unforgettable, a breakfast that spoke of resilience and tradition with every deep, savory bite. Ham bone soup with vegetables was one of those meals where one piece of meat flavored an entire pot. A single ham bone, stripped of most of its meat, simmered for hours with onions, carrots, and potatoes until the broth turned rich and smoky. My grandmother would add beans or greens if she had them, letting the flavors meld into something far more substantial than the ingredients suggested. Families gathered around steaming bowls, dipping bread into the broth and savoring the flavor the bone had left behind. It was frugal cooking at its finest, taking scraps and stretching them into nourishment. The soup fed many mouths, warmed cold nights, and made do with what was available. In the 1960s, when meat was costly, a ham bone could be the centerpiece of dinner, proving that thrift and patience could coax flavor out of nearly anything. Ham bone soup with vegetables carried both practicality and comfort in every ladleful. Rice and fatback gravy turned scraps into satisfaction. The fatback sizzled first, crisping into deep flavor as the grease melted down. Grandparents added flour, then water, whisking until the gravy thickened and darkened to perfection. Poured over rice, it became a meal that was cheap but felt rich. The salt from the fatback gave life to every grain, the smell strong enough to bring everyone to the kitchen. It was the kind of breakfast that didn't need talking, just eating, slow and thankful. It stretched what little there was, filling the air with warmth and the stomach with peace. Every spoonful told a story of survival through skill and patience. Sometimes the gravy was made with leftover drippings from the night before, deepened with onion or pepper if they had it. Grandparents said the secret was in the stirring, slow, steady, and full of intention. Each bite was a memory of endurance, a reminder that flavor was born from effort, not wealth.
Number 23, tomato gravy over biscuits. If you grew up in the deep South, you know that gravy did not always come from meat. A woman in rural Georgia in the early 1950s would fry a little bacon, pull it from the pan, then add flour and a can of stewed tomatoes to the drippings. She stirred it over heat until it thickened into a reddish gravy that she poured over split biscuits. This was one of those breakfasts that existed because of what a family did not have. If there was no sausage, no ham, no eggs, there was almost always a can of tomatoes and a little flour. The gravy had a tang to it, a slight sweetness from the tomatoes that made the biscuits taste like something more than bread. In parts of Mississippi, they called it red gravy. In parts of Florida, they called it poor man's gravy. Your grandmother probably did not call it anything. She just made it and set it on the table. That was enough. Number 20, sweet potato pancakes with sorghum. Leftover sweet potatoes from Sunday dinner almost always ended up on Tuesday's griddle, smashed into pancakes thick with sorghum syrup. The potatoes from Sunday got mashed cold with a fork, then mixed with a half cup of flour, 1 egg, and just enough buttermilk to loosen the batter. A small ladle poured the mix onto a hot, greased griddle, and the cakes came up orange-brown with crisp, lacy edges. The sorghum bottle sat on the table because it cost less than maple syrup and held more flavor in one spoon. Black families across the South kept a jug of sorghum on the shelf year-round, since 1 gallon could last from October planting to April plowing. The pancakes filled up a child fast, used food that would have gone bad by Wednesday, and tasted like dessert in the middle of a hard week. Number 22, sweet potato pone. Not a pie and not a casserole. Something in between with no modern equivalent. You grated raw sweet potatoes until your knuckles ached, mixed the pulp with molasses, buttermilk, cinnamon, and lard, then poured it into a greased pan and baked it low and slow until the top turned dark and caramelized. The texture was dense and chewy, almost like pudding that decided to become bread. Sweet potatoes were the cheapest vegetable in the 1960s South. A bushel cost less than $1 at roadside stands. Grandmothers who grew their own paid nothing. They baked pone in the evening when the oven was already hot from supper, wrapped it in cloth, and set it on the counter for morning. A slice with coffee was a full breakfast, sweet enough to feel like a treat, substantial enough to carry a person through 4 hours of work. Red-eye gravy turned almost nothing into something you could taste for the rest of the morning. You pour black coffee into the hot drippings left from frying a thin slice of country ham, watch the dark liquid settle with a reddish eye floating in the skillet, and ladled it over yesterday's biscuits. Biscuits going stiff soaked the gravy better than fresh ones. Nobody measured the coffee. You poured until the color looked right, let it bubble a minute, and that was all. The technique spread across Virginia, Tennessee, and the Carolinas under names like poor man's gravy and bird's eye gravy, traveling north with the Great Migration tucked inside the habits of women who had learned it by watching rather than reading. A heel of salt pork stretched across several mornings. Black coffee was already on the stove. What you got for that, almost nothing, was a hot, savory start that tasted like somebody cared. Red-eye gravy has left the table now, a casualty of pans that never build a crust worth scraping. The fried fish rolled with onions was a breakfast reflecting the close ties Black communities had with rivers and local fishing. Roast sacks were clean, seasoned with salt and pepper, then pan-fried in lard until firm and golden. Onions were fried alongside, their sweetness balancing the rich, dense flavor of the roe. The combination was eaten hot with cornbread or biscuits, making a plate that was hearty and packed with protein. For families near waterways, roe was an affordable catch that supplemented diets when store-bought meat was out of reach. It was not glamorous, but it was reliable and nourishing when every source of food mattered. Children grew up with it as a familiar part of mornings, while adults valued how little it cost. Fried fish, roe with onions, was quiet proof that rivers could feed families as well as farms. Salmon croquettes from a single can were the 5-minute miracle that Black grandmothers in post-war kitchens turned into something that smelled like Sunday, even on a Tuesday. After the Great Migration brought families north, canned pink salmon became a pantry anchor. Affordable at roughly 29 cents a can in the 1940s and protein-rich enough to carry a working woman through a long morning, she'd drain it, flake it with a fork, crack in 1 egg, press in a handful of crushed saltines, add black pepper, and have 2 patties sizzling in the cast iron skillet inside 4 minutes. The insider knowledge was the flour pinch. just enough all-purpose to tighten the mixture until, as food writer Tony Tipton Martin documented in Jubilee, it was no longer juicy. Too much and they were dense. Too little and they fell apart. You squeezed the patty in your palm and felt she made it look effortless. Nobody else ever got it right.
Fluffy biscuits with syrup or jelly were the breakfast treat 1960s kids begged for with wide eyes and hopeful voices, knowing their mother could see straight through them but might give in anyway. These biscuits were not the kind that popped out of a can. They were soft, hand-mixed, cut by a jar or a tin cup, and baked until their tops turned the faintest shade of gold. When they came out of the oven, the whole kitchen smelled like butter and warmth, the kind of smell that made children hover around the stove waiting for permission to grab one. Mothers split them open with their fingers, steam curling into the air, then drizzled syrup or spread jelly inside until the biscuit soaked up every bit of sweetness. Sometimes the syrup ran down the sides, and kids licked it from their hands without hesitation. These biscuits felt like a weekend, even on a weekday, like a celebration even when money was too tight for fancy breakfasts. Mothers made them because they filled stomachs and stretched ingredients, but children loved them because they tasted like happiness before school. As frozen biscuits and fast mornings took over, these tender homemade biscuits started to disappear. But for the generation who grew up on them, one bite still carries the memory of a warm kitchen, a busy mother moving with practiced grace, and the pure joy of getting the first biscuit straight from the pan. Leftover cornbread soaked in buttermilk and sweetened with molasses used what remained from Wednesday's supper, transforming it into Thursday morning comfort. Crumbled cornbread filled bowls, then cold buttermilk was poured over until the bread softened and absorbed the tangy liquid. Dark molasses drizzled on top provided sweetness that balanced the buttermilk's sour bite. This breakfast cost virtually nothing since it repurposed yesterday's bread and used staples every household kept. Grandmothers understood that nothing could be wasted when resources were limited. Children initially resisted the unusual combination, but learned to love its tangy sweetness. Adults appreciated how the simple bowl provided energy and nostalgia. The breakfast was especially common where buttermilk came from churning butter and molasses was cheaper than refined sugar. Leftover cornbread and buttermilk proved yesterday's food could become today's treasure. Butter sugar toast was the quick, sweet breakfast many children rushed toward before school, made from nothing more than bread, butter, and a sprinkle of sugar. Grandparents spread the butter all the way to the edges, making sure every bite would melt just right. The toast warmed the sugar until it softened slightly, creating a delicate crunch that felt almost like a treat. It was simple, fast, and inexpensive, yet it tasted like something far more indulgent. For many children, this was the breakfast they could hold in one hand while tying their shoes with the other. It tasted like busy mornings, like running out the door with crumbs on your shirt, like the gentle love of someone who wanted you fed. Even when there was no time, butter sugar toast may be overlooked today, but the memory of it still lingers for anyone who grew up on its warm sweetness. Stewed tomatoes over grits brought a burst of color and tang to the morning table, transforming something simple into something soulful. Ripe or canned tomatoes simmered low and slow with onions, butter, and a touch of sugar until the mixture turned thick, velvety, and full of life. The smell was inviting, a mix of sharp tomato and sweet onion softened by butter's richness. When poured over creamy, buttery grits, the sauce soaked in, creating a marriage of textures and flavors that felt like sunshine in a bowl. The dish was a favorite in households that prized flavor over fancy ingredients, a kind of poetry cooked from what was already on hand. For families who grew their own vegetables, stewed tomatoes were summer-saved in jars, opened on cold mornings to bring back warmth and memory. The slight acidity of the tomatoes cut through the richness of the grits, making each bite balanced and bright. It was cheap, filling, and nourishing, and no two batches ever tasted the same. Some added bacon grease for depth, others a pinch of red pepper for heat, but it always carried the same comforting soul. Stewed tomatoes over grits was proof that thrift, care, and creativity could feed both stomach and spirit. Grapefruit with sugar and a broiled topping was the picture of mid-century sophistication. elegant yet born of practicality. Halved grapefruit was sprinkled with sugar and broiled just long enough for the top to bubble and brown, creating a caramelized glaze that softened the tartness beneath. Served in its own rind with a little spoon, it looked like something from a hotel breakfast tray. Housewives loved it because it felt fancy but cost almost nothing. The heat mellowed the fruit, making it warm and fragrant, the sugar turning into a crisp, golden shell. It was light, refreshing, and surprisingly indulgent for something so simple. For a generation discovering convenience and presentation, this dish was breakfast theater. Grapefruit with sugar was more than fruit. It was optimism, the taste of a new kind of morning when simplicity could still feel special. Some families added a drizzle of honey or a sprinkle of cinnamon for extra warmth, while others topped it with a cherry for flair. It became a symbol of modern homemaking, polished, easy, and delightful to the eye. The broiled grapefruit was as much about beauty as flavor, proof that even the simplest fruit could feel luxurious when given a moment of care. Sorghum porridge was the kind of breakfast that filled both stomach and soul. Made from cornmeal slowly cooked in water or milk, it thickened into a smooth, golden base. Then came the sorghum, dark, sticky, and sweet, poured in thick ribbons that turned the porridge into comfort in a bowl. It had a deep flavor, richer than sugar, with the faint taste of smoke and earth. This was the kind of meal that warmed you from the inside out, especially on cold mornings when the fire had not yet chased away the chill. Mothers stirred it with wooden spoons, tasting as they went, knowing exactly when it was done. Children waited with spoons in hand, eager for the first bite. It was not fancy, but it was honest, full of energy for the long day ahead. Sorghum porridge taught patience, both in the making and in the eating. It was thick, hearty, and a little sweet, the kind of meal that made hard work possible and hunger distant. Every spoonful carried the memory of homegrown syrup and the rhythm of early mornings shared in quiet kitchens. Hot links with mustard gravy turned an ordinary morning into a bold feast of spice and tang, filling kitchens with the smoky perfume of seasoned sausage. Spicy, smoked hot links were seared until their skins blistered and juices sizzled, releasing a deep aroma that promised hearty flavor. Pan drippings were whisked with flour, broth, and sharp mustard to create a velvety gravy that carried both heat and brightness. Poured over slices of toast or spooned onto fluffy biscuits, the gravy soaked in and balanced the sausage's fire with a gentle tang. Some families added diced onions or a splash of vinegar for extra bite, while others sprinkled chopped parsley for freshness. This dish offered more than simple comfort. It was a statement of taste and tradition, celebrating the spice-loving side of Southern cooking. Hot links with mustard gravy reminded everyone at the table that breakfast could be daring and unforgettable, turning a cold morning into a lively gathering of smoky flavors and warm conversation. Coffee and condensed milk was the quiet start to countless mornings across generations. Before creamers, sugar packets, or modern machines, people reached for the same trusted can of condensed milk. It was thick, heavy, and sweet enough to turn even the strongest brew into something smooth and soothing. The first pour made a soft hiss, the kind that filled kitchens with calm before the day's noise began. It was more than just coffee. It was company, ritual, and comfort wrapped in steam. Men sipped it before long days in fields and factories. Women drank it while feeding children or ironing clothes. The milk stretched far, lasting through weeks of careful use, every drop measured with love and thrift. It tasted familiar, steady, and kind, the same way mornings always began. The smell lingered in the air long after the last sip, a sign the day had officially started. For many, it was their first sweetness, their first warmth, their first reminder that even simple things could feel abundant. Coffee and condensed milk was not fancy, but it was faithful, the flavor of home that stayed the same no matter where life went. Cabbage and onions with cornbread made a humble breakfast that filled both the belly and the heart. When meat was scarce, the skillet became a garden feast. Grandparents chopped cabbage fresh from the yard or the market, tossing it with sliced onions and a bit of lard or grease. The smell that rose from the pan was earthy and warm, like hope frying slow. As it cooked down, the cabbage softened and the onions turned sweet, making a broth rich enough to dip bread into. Cornbread baked in the oven beside it, crusty on top and tender inside. The two came together on the plate, steam rising in quiet grace. It was not fancy, but it was full of care. The kind of meal that kept families going through hard seasons, reminding them that flavor did not come from plenty. It came from patience. Every bite spoke of the land, of effort, and of faith in simple things. The cornbread soaked up the juices, catching every drop like a blessing. In those moments, a table without meat still felt abundant, and no one left hungry.
Number 25, cornbread crumbled in buttermilk. This was not a recipe. This was what your grandmother ate when she thought nobody was watching. A woman in Selma, Alabama, would take a leftover square of cornbread from the night before, crumble it into a tall glass of cold buttermilk, and eat it with a long spoon while standing at the kitchen counter. No plate, no fuss, just cornmeal and tang. In the 1950s, buttermilk was cheap. You could get a quart for less than 15 cents in most parts of the rural South. The cornbread was already made, already paid for. This was a breakfast that cost almost nothing and took less than a minute to prepare. Some women added a pinch of salt. Others added nothing at all. The cornbread soaked up the buttermilk and turned soft, almost like a pudding. Children in rural Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia grew up watching their grandmothers eat this standing at the sink before dawn. By the 1980s, it was gone from most kitchens. Your grandmother did not call it a recipe. She called it Tuesday. Number 25, fried cornmeal mush with cane syrup. For most black families in 1960, the morning started with a pot of yesterday's mush sliced into squares. The rule was simple. Cook a heavy pot of cornmeal on Sunday night, pour it into a loaf pan, and let it sit in the icebox until it was firm enough to slice. By Monday morning, a 1/4-inch slab hit the hot grease and crisped up dark brown on both sides. A spoon of cane syrup or molasses went over the top, and that was breakfast for a working man or a school child. Cornmeal sold for about 18 cents for a 5-pound sack in 1960, which meant a family could eat from that one bag for almost 2 weeks. Nothing got thrown away. The crumbs that fell off the cutting board went into the chicken bucket on the back porch. Number 25, one egg stretched 5 ways. In a household where 7 people needed breakfast and the icebox held 3 eggs, a mother in Birmingham cracked 1 egg into leftover rice, stirred it through, then fried the whole thing in bacon grease until the rice turned golden and the egg disappeared into every grain. Other mothers scrambled 1 egg into a pot of grits, letting the heat set it into thin ribbons of protein hiding in plain sight. Some beat an egg into flour and water to make a thin pancake that covered a plate and fooled a child into thinking they had gotten their fair share. In 1962, a dozen eggs cost 54 cents. Each egg was less than 5 cents. 5 cents between a child eating protein and a child eating nothing. Generations of black mothers did not have cookbooks for this. They had arithmetic and love, and those 2 things could make 1 egg feel like a feast. Pot liquor and cornbread gave everything, turning what most kitchens threw away into a breakfast that held a body through a full workday. Pot liquor is the dark, mineral-rich broth left after greens and salt pork have simmered for hours. Former slave Carol Graham of Alabama described children standing around a pot of greens liquor, crumbling cornbread into the liquid with spoons, and WP, a Federal Writers Project, records. After emancipation, the practice carried on. You heated the pot from the night before, crumbled yesterday's cornbread into a bowl, poured the hot liquid over it, and let the bread swell into something between soup and porridge. The nutrition was real. Iron and folate from the greens, protein from the pork, the slow fuel of cornmeal, and it cost nothing beyond what supper had already spent. Most people living alone today have never heard of starting the morning this way. The pots went first, and then the knowledge went with them. Saltfish and hoe cakes was a breakfast rooted in heritage and preservation. Saltfish, cured to last months, was soaked overnight to soften, then flaked and pan-fried until tender. Hoe cakes, simple cornmeal cakes cooked on a griddle, were served alongside, their crisp edges soaking up the salty richness of the fish. Together, the two made a meal that was filling and steeped in history. The pairing reflected African and Caribbean influences that endured in Black kitchens, blending practicality with cultural memory. Saltfish provided protein when fresh catches were unavailable, while hoe cakes required only cornmeal, water, and fat. For families stretched thin, this breakfast needed nothing expensive, yet delivered real sustenance. It carried both thrift and tradition, ensuring strength for the day with ingredients that lasted any season. Before she opened a single cabinet, you could smell the stewed prunes in the small pot on the back burner, which meant she'd been up since before sunrise, moving quietly through the kitchen while the house was still dark. Stewed prunes over an open biscuit were the breakfast that told you someone had been up at 5, working, feeding herself with the same care she'd given everyone else for decades. Dried prunes simmered in water with a strip of lemon peel and a spoon of sugar until they swelled fat and the liquid thickened. She started them first, so they were ready by the time the biscuit split. In Depression-era Black households, dried prunes were one of the cheapest fruits available year-round, and elders understood what researchers have confirmed. They stabilized digestion and sustained energy through long mornings when heavier food sat wrong. She didn't call it nutrition, she called it breakfast. The biscuit soaked up the syrup from the bottom, and the prunes sat on top, soft and dark. You ate it with a spoon like something precious.
Chocolate gravy over biscuits was the rare, magical breakfast that felt like a holiday, even on an ordinary morning. Mothers cooked cocoa, sugar, butter, and milk into a glossy gravy that poured hot over fresh biscuits. Children begged for it because it tasted like dessert disguised as breakfast, warm and sweet with a hint of chocolate that felt indulgent and unforgettable. It was not an everyday dish, just a sometimes treat, but those mornings became memories children still talk about decades later. The whole house lit up when someone whispered that chocolate gravy was coming, because everyone knew it meant the day was starting with joy instead of hurry. Mothers whisked the pot with careful hands to keep lumps from forming, and the smell drifted down hallways, pulling sleepy children to the kitchen before they were fully awake. The biscuits soaked up the gravy until they were soft enough to eat with a spoon, turning each bite into something warm enough to chase away cold mornings, and long after the plates were empty, the sweetness lingered, on tongues, in the air, and in the memory of a morning that felt like a gift. Fried apple hand pies made from dough scraps turned yesterday's pie making into today's breakfast feast. After preparing pies for dinner, grandmother saved every scrap of dough, rolling them thin and filling them with spiced apples cooked down with sugar and cinnamon. The small pockets were sealed tight, then fried in hot lard until golden brown and crispy outside while the filling bubbled inside. Children woke to the smell of frying dough and sweet apples. These hand pies were portable, perfect for eating while helping with preparations. The cost was nearly nothing since they used scraps that would otherwise be discarded, proving waste not wisdom. Families made dozens, stacking them on plates covered with towels to stay warm. Adults paired them with strong black coffee while children drank milk. Fried apple hand pies weren't about elegance, but making joy from leftovers. They represented creativity that turned scarcity into celebration. Salt pork gravy over bread was one of those breakfasts created from necessity. Yet it tasted like something that belonged in a country diner. Grandparents would fry slices of salt pork until the fat rendered out and the meat crisped, releasing a savory aroma that meant a hearty meal was on the way. The drippings were whisked with flour and milk to create a thick, salty gravy that clung to the spoon, rich and filling despite its humble ingredients. Poured over toast or biscuits, it transformed simple bread into something warm and deeply satisfying. This was a breakfast made for long days and empty pockets, a way to stretch flavor as far as it could go. Children did not think about thrift. They just knew the gravy tasted good and made the morning feel special. The saltiness, the creaminess, and the soft bread soaking up every drop created a combination that lingered in both taste and memory. It was the kind of meal that carried families through tough times and still managed to feel generous. Even today, people who grew up with salt pork gravy remember it with a fondness that nothing else can quite match. Homemade apple butter on toast was the taste of patience and the smell of love that never hurried. It began with baskets of apples, peeled, cored, and cooked slow over low fire until they turned deep brown and velvety. The stirring never stopped, hour after hour, until the mixture thickened into something smooth as memory itself. A spoonful spread over toast was all it took to turn an ordinary morning into something sacred. It was sweet, but not loud, subtle, warm, and familiar, like a quiet Sunday with family. Mothers filled jars with it in the fall, sealing them tight for the months when the trees went bare and fresh fruit was only a memory. When opened in winter, that first whiff carried the scent of sunlight and cinnamon, the echo of orchards and laughter. Children slathered it on toast while elders smiled, remembering the same taste from decades before. It was more than food. It was time preserved, proof that care could be tasted and love could be stored in glass. Each jar of apple butter wasn't just a pantry staple. It was a family heirloom in disguise, made to be shared, savored, and remembered. Fried apples and biscuits turned simple fruit into a morning celebration. Apples were sliced thin, tossed into a skillet of melted butter and dusted with sugar until they softened and gleamed like caramel. The smell alone was enough to draw everyone to the table. Served warm beside soft biscuits, the apples made their own syrup, sticky and golden, perfect for spooning or dipping. It was the sort of breakfast that reminded families that sweetness did not have to come from fancy ingredients. It could come from what grew in their own backyard. Sometimes cinnamon or nutmeg found its way into the pan, giving each bite a touch of warmth that lingered. Fried apples and biscuits were especially loved in fall when orchards overflowed and waste was never an option. Grandparents knew how to stretch everything: a few apples, a bit of butter, and the will to make something memorable. This dish was their way of turning simplicity into comfort, of teaching that care was the secret ingredient in any meal. It was nostalgia on a plate, sweet, soft, and glowing, like a memory you could taste. Salt fish and Johnny cakes was a breakfast rooted deeply in heritage and tradition. Salt fish, preserved and dried to last for months, was soaked, flaked, and pan-fried until flavorful and tender. Johnny cakes, simple cornmeal cakes cooked on a griddle, were served alongside, their soft texture soaking up the salty richness of the fish. Together, the two made a breakfast that was filling, balanced, and steeped in history. The pairing reflected African and Caribbean influences that endured in African-American kitchens, blending practicality with cultural memory. Salt fish provided protein when fresh fish was unavailable, while Johnny cakes required only cornmeal, water, and a little fat. The result was a plate that carried both thrift and tradition, ensuring families had strength for the day ahead. For many, it was a taste of survival and a connection to community. Saltfish and Johnny cakes once held pride on the table, even if today they are rarely remembered. Okra and tomato breakfast stew offered a savory morning alternative that celebrated the summer garden's best. Fresh okra pods were sliced and simmered with ripe tomatoes, onions, and a hint of garlic until the vegetables softened into a flavorful broth. The natural thickening quality of okra gave the stew a gentle body, making it perfect for ladling over warm cornbread. Some families added smoked sausage or a pinch of cayenne for a heartier dish, while others kept it purely vegetarian, letting the vegetables shine. Served steaming hot, it filled the kitchen with a scent both earthy and bright, reminding everyone of harvest days and backyard gardens. Okra and tomato breakfast stew reflected African American traditions of making the most of seasonal produce, proving that breakfast could be savory, sustaining, and deeply tied to the land. It invited families to gather early and savor the simple pleasure of fresh vegetables cooked with care and served with love. Corncob jelly was sweetness made from what everyone else would have thrown away. When the kernels were long gone, grandmothers gathered the empty cobs, boiled them until the water blushed golden, and stirred in sugar until it gleamed like melted sunlight. The scent filled the air, soft and buttery, with a whisper of summer still clinging to the pot. Once cooled, it set into a glossy jelly, clear as amber and delicate as spun glass. Spread on biscuits or cornbread, it shimmered in the morning light, tasting faintly of cornfields and warm days. There was something almost magical in the way it turned waste into beauty, a sweet defiance against hunger and hardship. Each jar of corncob jelly held more than flavor. It held proof that nothing in a Southern kitchen was ever truly useless. It was passed between neighbors, sold at church socials, or gifted with a ribbon tied around the lid. For families who had little, it brought luxury to breakfast and hope to the table. Corncob jelly was not just food, it was gratitude preserved. Ground kudzu root paste emerged when conventional flours were scarce and starchy substitutes were needed to thicken stews or stretch breads. Kudzu, an invasive vine introduced from Asia, sent deep roots into the southern soil that stored abundant starch. Enslaved gatherers dug these roots, washed and dried them, then pounded them into a fine powder. Mixed with water, the powder formed a paste that thickened soups or acted as a binder for cornmeal cakes. Its mild flavor and reliable texture made it a quiet but important ingredient in times of scarcity. After emancipation, some rural families continued to harvest kudzu for its starch, and today herbalists still value it for its medicinal qualities. Ground kudzu root paste shows how knowledge of local plants and persistence in foraging allowed cooks to replace costly ingredients with what the land freely offered, turning an aggressive vine into a vital pantry staple, and demonstrating again how necessity inspired both culinary creativity and a deeper understanding of the Southern landscape's hidden gifts.
Number 19, liver and onions. Your grandmother did not eat this because she liked it. She ate it because she knew it was good for you. A woman in Anniston, Alabama, would slice calf liver thin, soak it in milk for an hour to pull out the bitterness, then fry it alongside rings of yellow onion in a skillet with bacon grease. She served it for breakfast with grits and a biscuit. In the 1950s, liver was one of the cheapest cuts of meat at the butcher counter. You could buy a pound for 30 cents. Doctors in that era actually recommended liver for pregnant women and growing children because of its high iron content. Your grandmother did not know about iron. She just knew that when her children ate liver in the morning, they did not come home dizzy from the heat in the afternoon. She was a nutritionist before the word existed. And by the 1970s, when people decided that organ meat was not worth eating, they lost the cheapest, most powerful breakfast on the table. That cost them more than they knew. Number 21, salt pork gravy, overday old biscuits. No biscuit was ever thrown out in a black household in 1960 because a tough biscuit became the foundation for the cheapest gravy on the planet. 2 small cubes of salt pork rendered in a skillet until the bottom was coated in golden fat. A heaping spoon of flour stirred into the grease-brown slow, and then a cup of evaporated milk thinned with water got whisked in until the gravy was thick enough to coat the back of a spoon. The yesterday biscuits, hard and a little stale, got split open and laid in the bowl, and the gravy poured over them softened them right back to fresh. Working families in Memphis and Birmingham ate this twice a week through the winter months. It used what was already in the kitchen. It cost about a dime in ingredients, and it sat heavy enough to last a full morning of work. The plate went out the door warm, and the bowl came back empty by the second swallow. Number 16, smothered potatoes with onions. 3 potatoes, 1 onion, a tablespoon of lard, salt and pepper, a skillet, and a lid. You sliced everything thin and fried it together with the lid on until the potatoes turned soft and golden and the onions dissolved into a sweet, sticky tangle. The lid trapped steam and turned the skillet into a little oven. 15 minutes and it fed 2 people generously or 3 adequately. Potatoes cost 6 cents a pound. Onions were a nickel. Total cost, less than 20 cents. In households across the south side of Chicago and the west end of Louisville, smothered potatoes appeared every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Tuesday and Thursday were grits. Weekend was biscuits. That rotation lasted years in families where the budget never changed. Here's what that meant. You laid out soda crackers on a plate and poured cane syrup over them in slow amber loops until each cracker pooled in sweetness, then ate them before they lost their snap. The whole pleasure was the contrast between the salt and the syrup's deep, dark sweetness. Cane syrup was a foundational pantry item in Black Southern households, made from sugar cane juice cooked down into a thick, richly flavored syrup, sweeter than molasses but less bitter, far cheaper than refined sugar, and lasting months without refrigeration. It stretched across dozens of breakfasts, sweetening biscuits, hoe cakes, and cornbread, the same way jam sweetened toast in households that could afford jam. On mornings when nothing else was ready, and every household had those mornings, crackers and cane syrup was the answer. It cost almost nothing. It got you out the door. If crackers and cane syrup asked nothing, things. Leftover bean mash on toast was a breakfast that refused to let last night's dinner go to waste. Beans cooked the evening before were mashed with a fork, seasoned with salt and pepper, and spread onto slices of bread or leftover biscuits. The mash was sometimes warmed in a skillet with a bit of lard, giving it a slightly crispy exterior while keeping the inside soft. Pinto beans and navy beans were the most common varieties, cheap enough to buy in bulk and filling enough to carry a family through the day. This dish required no extra ingredients, making it ideal for mornings when the pantry was nearly bare. Children ate it without complaint because it was familiar and hearty, and adults valued how it stretched one meal into 2. Bean mash on toast was a quiet act of resilience, turning simple leftovers into fuel for another day. Peanut butter on toast with a smear of leftover bacon drippings sounds like an accident, but in Black kitchens from the 1930s through the 60s, it was a calculated decision by women who understood how to build a filling breakfast out of almost nothing. Peanut butter sold for roughly 10 cents a pound during the Depression and promoted nationwide by the Bureau of Home Economics as a cheap protein source after World War I, became a staple in African American pantries when meat was unaffordable. The dripping tin sat open on the counter, and spreading a thin layer across the peanut butter toast was natural. The salt cut through the sweetness, the fat extended the staying power. The whole thing came together in under 3 minutes. Together they kept you full until afternoon, and fullness was the point on mornings when work started before sunrise and lunch wasn't guaranteed until 2. Nobody planned it the first time. You did it because both things were there and it worked, and you never stopped. The dripping tin was always on the counter. Now nobody keeps a dripping tin.
Sausage patties made from scratch were the heartiest part of many 1960s Black breakfasts, the kind of food that made a child feel ready to take on anything the school day threw at them. Mothers seasoned the meat by hand with salt, pepper, sage, and whatever spices their own mothers had taught them to use. They shaped the patties carefully and laid them in the skillet where they sizzled, browned, and filled the house with a smell that pulled children straight into the kitchen. These patties were crisp on the outside, juicy inside, and full of flavor you could not find in store-bought sausage. Kids sandwiched them in biscuits, crumbled them into grits, or ate them plain with their fingers when they were too hungry to wait for a fork. For mothers, making sausage from scratch was a way to stretch ingredients and control the flavor. For children, it was the taste of a real breakfast. As packaged sausage became easier to buy, homemade patties faded from daily life. But anyone who grew up eating them knows nothing beats the sound of sausage frying in a cast-iron skillet early in the morning. Rice pudding with raisins and nutmeg turned leftover rice into Thanksgiving morning sweetness that felt like dessert before the day started. Cold rice was mixed with milk, eggs, sugar, and plump raisins, then baked slowly until creamy and set. Nutmeg grated fresh over the top provided warm spice that made kitchens smell like celebration. This breakfast repurposed rice left from earlier meals, ensuring nothing was wasted. The pudding could be served warm or cold, making it versatile for busy mornings. Families treasured it because it tasted indulgent while using ingredients already on hand. Children picked out the raisins if they didn't like them, but adults savored every spoonful. The custard-like texture created comfort, while the sweetness provided energy. Rice pudding with raisins wasn't just thrifty cooking, but genuine deliciousness that happened to use leftovers. Fried bologna biscuits were the kind of breakfast that made you feel like you were getting something special even when money was tight. Grandparents would slice thick rounds of bologna and lay them into a popping skillet, letting the edges curl and brown until the flavor deepened into something smoky and rich. The hot slices were tucked into fresh biscuits, often homemade or leftover from the night before, absorbing just enough of the bologna's warmth to soften perfectly. It was salty, savory, and incredibly satisfying, the kind of handheld breakfast that felt almost luxurious despite coming from inexpensive ingredients. Children loved the way the biscuit crumbled slightly with each bite, mixing with the bold taste of the fried bologna. Adults appreciated how easy it was to make and how far it could stretch the budget. This was the kind of food that reminded families that good meals did not need fancy ingredients or long cooking times. All they needed was a skillet, some biscuits, and someone who knew how to make simple food feel unforgettable. Leftover rice fried with eggs and onions was the taste of ingenuity, proof that nothing good ever went to waste. A pot of yesterday's rice, once plain and forgotten, became golden and flavorful with just a few simple touches. In a skillet slicked with grease, onions browned until sweet and fragrant before the rice was tossed in, sizzling as it hit the heat. Beaten eggs followed, binding everything together in a warm, savory tangle. Sometimes a scrap of meat joined the mix, a bit of ham, bacon, or sausage, turning the dish into something rich and filling. The smell of it cooking was comfort itself, the kind of scent that woke up sleepy eyes and lifted tired hearts. It was breakfast for working families, quick and hearty, ready in minutes. Mothers called it stretching what you had, but to children it was simply delicious. Every forkful tasted like resourcefulness and home, a small triumph born from yesterday's leftovers and today's love. Grit cakes with syrup were a masterclass in never wasting a thing. Yesterday's leftover grits were poured into a pan, chilled and sliced into squares by morning. Dropped into a hot skillet, they fried to a golden crust, crisp on the outside and tender within. A drizzle of syrup or honey turned them into something remarkable, part breakfast, part dessert. The flavor was simple yet deep, corn and sweetness mingling in harmony. It was the kind of meal that made you proud of what you could do with so little. In every crackle of the pan, there was resourcefulness and gratitude. Fried grit cakes were not just food, they were history reheated, proof that waste was never welcome in a wise kitchen. The first bite crunched before melting into creamy softness, a texture only patience could achieve. Sometimes people topped them with butter, sometimes with jam, sometimes with nothing at all. Every version told a story of thrift and comfort, of turning yesterday's labor into today's pleasure. The smell alone, warm corn and caramelized edges, could fill a house with peace. This was the breakfast of people who respected what they had and who believed that even leftovers deserved to taste like love. Sweet potato biscuits brought color and comfort to every table they touched. Mashed sweet potatoes were folded into flour, butter, and milk, giving the dough a soft orange glow. When baked, they rose tender and fragrant, their edges golden and their centers meltingly light. They tasted faintly sweet, but carried a heartiness that stayed with you. You could eat them with ham, honey, or just a pat of butter, and they'd still feel like home. Sweet potato biscuits were more than food. They were care turned into something warm and golden. Families made them on Sundays, holidays, and any day that called for a little joy. The smell alone could pull everyone to the table before grace was said. They were proof that Southern kitchens did not need luxury to create something special. Every biscuit came from patience, hands, and history. Sweet potatoes gave them soul, but love gave them flavor. And that is why no breakfast felt complete without them. Pork neck bone and rice turned a humble cut into a deeply flavored breakfast that spoke to generations of resourceful cooking. Meaty pork neck bones were simmered slowly with onions, garlic, and bay leaves until their rich broth infused every grain of rice. The long cooking released tenderness and flavor, transforming inexpensive ingredients into a dish that tasted luxurious. Families often added a pinch of red pepper or a splash of vinegar for brightness, while some stirred in greens for added nourishment. Served steaming hot, pork neck bone and rice offered hearty protein and comforting warmth that fueled long workdays. This meal reflected the African-American tradition of using every part of the animal with skill and respect, proving that nothing needed to be wasted to create something memorable. Pork neck bone and rice stood as both sustenance and celebration, a bowl of savory history that reminded everyone at the table of the creativity and strength passed down through kitchens across the South and beyond. Roasted chestnuts carried warmth and nourishment through the cold months when plantation rations were meager and gardens lay dormant. Enslaved families foraged chestnut trees that grew wild in the surrounding woods, gathering the smooth brown nuts and roasting them in hearth ashes or iron skillets until their shells cracked and the sweet flesh softened. The nuts' high energy content and natural sweetness made it an important source of calories and comfort, especially during long winter evenings. Roasted chestnuts became part of a wider African-American food tradition, appearing in holiday celebrations and roadside markets after emancipation. Their gentle flavor paired well with cornmeal breads and simple stews, and many families passed down techniques for roasting and storing them long after the plantation era ended. Today, roasted chestnuts sold at winter festivals and city street corners carry echoes of that history, reminding us that what began as a survival practice also nurtured community and seasonal ritual for generations who transformed hardship into enduring culture. Molasses pound cake was the kind of dessert that lived in memory long after the last crumb was gone. It was heavy in the hand, rich in flavor, and spiced with cinnamon, ginger, and cloves, made for cold evenings when the scent of baking was enough to warm the whole house. Molasses stood in for sugar when sugar was too dear, and it gave the cake its deep brown color and caramel soul. The batter, thick and fragrant, was poured into worn loaf pans that had seen a lifetime of holidays. When it emerged from the oven, the crust glistened, slightly sticky, like honey touched by smoke. African-American families passed this recipe through generations, often written in fading ink on the backs of church bulletins or tucked inside cookbooks. It wasn't just dessert, it was preservation. The flavor was bold and comforting, sweet without being showy, a reflection of the people who made it. Served with a glass of milk or a drizzle of cream, it carried history in every bite. Molasses pound cake wasn't about extravagance, it was about memory, about keeping sweetness alive even when times were lean. In that way, it wasn't just cake, it was resilience baked golden.
Number 22, buttermilk biscuits with cane syrup. In the 1950s, Alaga cane syrup was a staple on black breakfast tables across the South. Women in Mobile, Alabama, would pull a pan of biscuits from the oven, split each one open, lay a pat of butter inside, and pour a ribbon of dark cane syrup over the top. That was the whole breakfast some mornings, just biscuits and syrup. The Alaga brand was so popular in black households that the company marketed directly to African American communities for decades. A bottle cost about 20 cents in 1955. The syrup was thick, dark, and had a deep sweetness that refined sugar could not match. Children soaked their biscuits until the bread was almost translucent. The syrup pooled on the plate and you used your finger to get the last of it. This was not poverty. This was simple. This was a woman turning flour and sweetness into something her children remembered for the rest of their lives. They were following a memory. Number 18, Streako lean and red-eye gravy. Few breakfasts spoke louder about black Southern survival than a thin slice of Streako lean with a pour of red-eye gravy on top. Streako lean was the cheap cousin of bacon, a piece of side meat with stripes of pink running through the fat. It cost half what bacon cost in 1965, sometimes only 15 cents a pound at a country store. 2 slices went into a hot pan and curled up tight as they crisped, leaving a thin layer of brown drippings stuck to the bottom. A half cup of strong black coffee poured straight into that hot pan, and the brown bits lifted off the iron in seconds. That dark, salty pour was the red-eye gravy. It went over a split biscuit or a wedge of cornbread, and the streak of lean sat right on top. The flavor was bigger than the price, and most older folks today still remember the smell of coffee hitting that pan first thing in the morning. For many of us, that one pour of red-eye gravy is the closest thing our grandmothers ever left behind to a written recipe. Number 15, tomato gravy over biscuits. Not tomato sauce, tomato gravy. You started with bacon drippings in a skillet, added flour, and stirred until it browned, then poured in a can of stewed tomatoes and let it simmer until it thickened into a chunky, savory gravy, somehow both sweet and smoky. Pour it over a split biscuit, and you had a breakfast that tasted like a southern garden and a smokehouse having a conversation. This was a staple in black households across Alabama and Mississippi, especially in months when canned tomatoes were the only fruit in the cupboard. A can cost 12 cents. The drippings and flour were already there. For a senior on a fixed income, this required almost no shopping and used ingredients that kept for months. Modern food writers call it a forgotten classic. It was never forgotten by the people who needed it. And frying the next morning's bread. On mornings when the pantry was light, it went onto a slice of bread. You spread it right to the edges, either ate it cold with coffee or ran it under the broiler until the fat melted in and the edges crisped. Either way, it tasted rich and smoky in a way bread only tastes when animal fat has entered it. Saving bacon grease was not just frugality, it was a philosophy. Nothing in the African American kitchen was more fundamental than the idea that what was rendered from the hog belonged to the cook and would be honored by using every last drop. That practice is nearly gone. She knew its value without ever naming it. Crackers and cane syrup required almost no thought and almost no effort, and that was its value on a weekday morning when the stove wasn't warm. Collard green omelet was a breakfast born from thrift, and the habit of making yesterday's dinner stretched into the next morning. Collard greens, cooked slow with seasoning the night before, were tucked into beaten eggs and folded in a hot skillet. The result was frugal and flavorful, blending the smoky richness of the greens with the softness of the eggs. Families valued it because it used what they already had, ensuring nothing went unused. The combination gave nutrition and comfort without extra expense. For children, it was a familiar flavor in a new form, while adults enjoyed the heartiness without needing costly meat. It tied breakfast to dinner, blending the rhythms of the household into one cycle of reuse. Collard green omelet carried the quiet wisdom of making much from little and starting every morning strong. Oatmeal with cane syrup and a spoon of fatback grease was not the oatmeal you know, not the instant packet, not the quick cooking kind with the bear on the box, but thick rolled oats that Black grandmothers across the South put on the stove every morning, which came out dense enough to hold a spoon upright and rich enough to carry a person through hard physical labor. The fatback grease was the alchemy. One spoonful stirred into the finished oatmeal added savory depth that changed the entire character of the bowl. No longer just sweet and starchy, but layered, filling in the way only animal fat fills you. Cane syrup went in after, drizzled in a slow figure 8 across the top, and the two flavors, smoky salt and sweet grass, met in the hot oats and became something neither was alone. Rolled oats were cheap and kept indefinitely. Fatback grease lived in a jar beside the stove in every kitchen she ever cooked in. In 5 minutes together, they became the kind of breakfast that held you until evening. The recipe is gone now. The jar is still on the shelf somewhere.
Fried bologna sandwiches were the busy morning lifesaver Black mothers relied on when there was no time for fuss, but everyone still needed something filling before school. The bologna was sliced, sometimes cut with a little cross in the middle so it would fry flat in the skillet, sizzling until the edges curled and crisped. The bread toasted in butter or came straight from the bag, soft and warm from the heat of the fried meat pressed against it. A smear of mustard or a slice of cheese turned it into something glorious, far better than anyone expected from such simple ingredients. Kids loved the smokiness, the crunch, the way it felt like a treat even though it cost almost nothing and came together in minutes. Mothers loved that it kept everyone full until lunchtime. In the 1960s, fried bologna sandwiches were a working family staple, especially on mornings when chores were waiting, the clock was ticking, and no one could sit long at the table. Over time, breakfast sandwiches from drive-through windows replaced the homemade version, and children grew up without the sound of bologna popping against a hot skillet, but anyone who remembers it can still taste that first hot bite, can still remember standing in the kitchen holding a warm sandwich wrapped in a napkin, ready to run out the door. It was quick, comforting, and made with the kind of care only a busy mother can give. Fried hominy with onions and butter became Thanksgiving morning comfort that connected families to Native American and African culinary traditions. Canned hominy, those large white corn kernels processed with lye, were drained and fried in butter with sliced onions until everything turned golden. The hominy developed crispy exteriors while staying soft inside, and the onions caramelized into sweetness. This breakfast was filling, affordable, and quick to prepare. Hominy represented the indigenous knowledge that African Americans adopted and adapted, creating dishes honoring multiple heritage streams. The corn's substantial texture provided satisfaction. Children enjoyed the mild flavor and interesting texture. Adults valued how the dish provided lasting energy without requiring much time or money. Fried hominy with onions proved that simple preparation could honor complex cultural histories. Cracklin biscuits were a breakfast born from tradition, from kitchens where pork cracklings were saved and treasured because they added flavor nothing else could match, mixed into biscuit dough. The cracklings melted slightly as the biscuits baked, releasing savory richness into every bite. Grandparents made these biscuits with steady hands and an understanding of how to stretch ingredients while still creating something deeply satisfying. The result was warm, crumbly, and full of flavor. A biscuit that needed no butter or jam to taste complete. It was the kind of breakfast that connected families to their heritage, to moments when nothing went to waste and everything had a purpose. Children often loved the surprising crunch, not realizing it came from a history of thrift and creativity. Cracklin biscuits remain a powerful memory for many, a taste of home that has the strength of generations behind it.
If one of these breakfasts brought back a memory of someone you loved, leave their name in the comments. And if you know a dish that should have made this list, tell us which one and who used to make it. Hit subscribe so you never miss the next trip back to that kitchen. Next time, we are going even deeper into the meals that disappeared when the old neighborhood changed. Until then, eat well